In front of 500 witnesses, the white billionaire raised his crystal glass, his eyes cold as ice, and offered a toast to the brown-skinned woman he was about to publicly destroy. "Sign the papers, Sophia," he sneered, his voice amplified across the cliffside mansion. "You'll be nothing without my roof, nothing without my name." She didn't flinch. She signed. The pen hit the legal parchment with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. And that's when the landing lights of the private jet, a jet he didn't own, cut through the coastal fog, aiming straight for his property. No one moved. The humiliation was finished, but the reckoning had just begun. Heavenly God, we place our hearts in your hands today. Cover every woman in this family with divine strength, quiet courage, and unbreakable dignity. Bless the women who give love without counting the cost, who carry families on tired shoulders, and who still smile through pain. Grant them good health, peaceful minds, and homes filled with warmth. Let no woman here ever feel unseen, unheard, or unloved, because in your eyes she is precious and powerful. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. James Stories, your own family story channel. This space was built with love, honesty, and respect, especially for women who are the backbone of every home and every story. I give you my heart in every word I write. Stay with me, feel this story, and walk with me till the end, because this family rises together. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. James." The wind off the cliff carried champagne laughter and expensive perfume, blending them into something sharp and artificial. It moved through the open terraces of the apex as if it were alive, brushing past crystal chandeliers, slipping between silk dresses and tailored jackets, whispering against glass walls that reflected the night sky like a mirror too proud to crack. 500 guests stood beneath those chandeliers, each one carefully dressed for importance, each one convinced they were standing inside greatness. The apex rose behind them, steel bones wrapped in glass, perched on the cliff like a dare. A mansion balanced not just on stone, but on ego, secrecy, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been questioned. Sophia Vance stood near the edge of the crowd, invisible by design. Not because she lacked beauty, not because she lacked presence, but because she had learned over 12 years exactly how small she needed to become to survive in Damon Croft's world. She wore black silk that didn't shimmer under the lights. No diamonds hugged her throat. No borrowed brilliance tried to announce her worth. The fabric moved when she breathed, and that was all it was meant to do. Her hair was pinned back simply, not styled to impress, not arranged to invite comment. Tonight was not about being seen. Tonight was about staying steady. She held a champagne flute she hadn't touched. The bubbles rose and burst again and again, restless, like thoughts she refused to let surface. Her fingers didn't tremble. They hadn't trembled in years. She had trained them out of weakness the way other people train themselves into obedience. Stillness had become her armor. From where she stood, she could see the entire room without being noticed herself. That was the advantage of being overlooked. Conversations floated past her like loose pages, half-finished sentences about stock prices, political favors, art acquisitions that weren't about art at all. Names dropped casually, as if power were something you could spill without consequence. No one said her name. Not once. She watched women who looked like they belonged here, pale skin glowing under warm light, laughter polished and light, hands heavy with inherited jewelry. She watched men who believed this house reflected their own greatness, simply because Damon had invited them inside it. She had designed the curve of the ceiling above their heads. None of them knew. Somewhere near the center of the room, Damon Croft stood beneath the largest chandelier, positioned precisely where the light would flatter him most. He always knew where to stand. Silver blonde hair styled with effortless precision. a tailored suit that whispered money without shouting. His blue eyes scanned the room the way a general surveyed territory he already owned. He was radiant. He always was. People leaned toward him unconsciously, as if his confidence bent gravity. Laughter followed him. Approval clung to him like perfume. Damon Croft didn't just command attention, he absorbed it. Sophia watched him with an expression so neutral it bordered on absence. This was his night, his mansion, his victory. That's what everyone believed. She had once believed it too. A string quartet softened as Damon lifted a hand. The room obeyed instinctively. Conversations tapered off, glasses lowered, bodies angled toward him. The silence that followed wasn't sudden. It was cultivated. The kind of silence that knew its place. Damon smiled. It was the smile that had landed magazine covers and political donors alike. The smile that suggested generosity while promising control. He tapped the microphone lightly, as if to test the room's pulse. "Friends," he began, voice warm, smooth, practiced. Applause erupted immediately. Sophia didn't clap. She shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself against the marble floor she had selected personally for its durability, not its shine. Her gaze moved, not to Damon's face, but to the structure around him. The load-bearing columns disguised as art, the angles meant to guide sound, the ceiling height designed to make applause feel louder than it was. Everything here amplified him. That, too, had been intentional. Damon spoke about vision, about legacy, about the apex as a symbol of achievement. He thanked investors, partners, friends. He spoke the language of success fluently, like a man born bilingual in wealth and entitlement. Each sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. Sophia listened, not to the words, but to the spaces between them. She knew when it was coming. He always liked to save it for the moment when people were most relaxed, most open, most convinced of his generosity. Public kindness made private cruelty easier to swallow. He had taught her that lesson early. "And of course," Damon continued, his smile widening just a fraction, "a project like this is never built alone." A ripple of agreement moved through. The crowd. Sophia felt it then. The shift, the tightening in the room, the subtle reorientation of energy. Her heartbeat slowed. This was it. Damon's blue eyes swept the audience theatrically, lingering on faces that mattered, before drifting, deliberately, toward the shadows near the terrace doors. Toward her. "For years," he said lightly, "I've been supported by someone who preferred the background." A polite chuckle echoed. Sophia didn't move. "She believed in quiet contribution," Damon went on, "in sacrifice, in understanding her place." The words brushed her skin like cold rain. He paused. Then he said her name. "Sophia." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't kind, it was summoned. Every head turned. 500 pairs of eyes searched for her at once, scanning the edges of the room, the corners, the places they hadn't bothered to look before. The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was curious, predatory. Sophia stepped forward, not quickly, not slowly, just enough. The light found her immediately, as if the room itself had been waiting. Her brown skin caught the glow of the chandelier, not reflecting it, but absorbing it. Her expression was composed, but something deeper lived behind her eyes, something old, something unbreakable. She felt the weight of their attention press against her ribs. This was the part Damon enjoyed most, the reveal, not because he was proud of her, but because he controlled the timing of her existence. He smiled down at her from the stage. Tonight, he wasn't pretending anymore. As Sophia met Damon's gaze, she realized something chilling. This moment hadn't been designed to embarrass her quietly. It had been engineered to erase her publicly. The silence after her name lingered longer than it should have. Damon let it stretch. He understood timing the way other men understood money. He knew when to pause, when to allow discomfort to ripen, when to let anticipation do the work for him. 500 guests waited, not for Sophia to speak, but for Damon to decide what she was allowed to be. He had always been like this. Damon Croft collected things, not casually, not sentimentally. He collected with intent. Buildings were the easiest. Cities followed. He bought skylines the way others bought watches, without asking what it cost beyond money. But people were his favorite acquisitions. Faces that elevated him, minds that fed him, loyalty that made him look larger than life. Sophia had once believed she was different. That belief had been her first mistake. She remembered their beginning with an uncomfortable clarity. Not romance, not fantasy. Precision. The way he had studied her across a crowded awards hall years ago, eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing an opportunity rather than a woman. She had been standing beside her winning design, answering questions with hands still stained faintly with graphite, heart racing not from attention but from pride. She had been brilliant then, unapologetically so. Damon approached her with a smile that suggested admiration, but carried calculation beneath it. He asked thoughtful questions, the kind that made her feel seen without ever revealing himself. He praised her work, not excessively, just enough to signal authority. When he spoke her name, he pronounced it carefully, like it mattered. She hadn't noticed how that made her soften. He told her he admired ambition, that he respected women who built things, that the world needed minds like hers. It felt like recognition after years of being underestimated. It felt earned. It felt safe. What she hadn't understood, what she couldn't have understood, was that Damon admired ambition only when it bent toward him. Her success didn't inspire him. It threatened him. So love became a leash, not all at once, not violently. Damon was far too refined for that. He didn't demand surrender. He orchestrated it. He praised her intensity, then suggested she didn't need to work so hard anymore. He framed rest as care, sacrifice as partnership. "Let me take care of you," he'd said, voice warm, eyes sincere. She had mistaken that for devotion. What it really meant was, stop shining where I can't control the light. It began with small things. Invitations she declined because his schedule mattered more. Projects she postponed because travel was inconvenient. Awards she missed because appearances were required elsewhere. Beside him. At first, people still said her name. Then they said it less. Then they stopped saying it at all. She became Damon Croft's wife. And that somehow erased everything she had built before him. Standing beneath the chandeliers now, Sophia felt the weight of that erasure pressing against her chest. Not grief, clarity. She saw the pattern clearly for the first time, not as a series of personal failures, but as a system Damon had perfected. He didn't just collect people. He curated them. Damon continued speaking, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Some people," he said lightly, "prefer the comfort of being guided." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The phrasing was deliberate, generous on the surface, dismissive underneath. Sophia recognized it instantly. He was reframing her silence as choice, as weakness. He glanced at her again, just briefly, not to check her reaction, to assert ownership. This was his art. He loved moments like this, moments where the room belonged to him completely, where his words shaped reality faster than truth could interrupt. He had done it in boardrooms, in courtrooms, at charity galas. He had perfected the smile that made cruelty sound reasonable. Sophia felt the old instinct rise, the urge to shrink, to smooth the edges, to make this easier for everyone else. She recognized it for what it was now, conditioning. She didn't give in. Instead, she lifted her chin. That alone unsettled him. Damon continued, but something in his rhythm shifted. He hadn't expected her to hold his gaze. He hadn't expected presence. He had expected compliance, the same quiet acceptance that had followed her for years. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He pivoted smoothly, turning the narrative toward gratitude, toward magnanimity. He spoke about opportunity, about how some people needed structure more than freedom, about how success required knowing when to step aside for something greater. Each word pushed her further into the role he had written for her. But Sophia wasn't listening the way she used to. She was watching. She noticed the way his hand flexed slightly at his side when she didn't look away, the way his eyes flicked briefly toward the legal counsel standing near the stage, the way his breath shortened when the crowd leaned in too closely. For the first time, she saw something beneath his confidence. Urgency. Damon wasn't just humiliating her. He was rushing her. That realization landed quietly, but it changed everything. He wanted this finished, clean, public. Whatever came next depended on her obedience. Sophia's pulse steadied. She understood now that this wasn't about ending a marriage. It was about sealing a story, his version of it, before she had a chance to disrupt it. Damon needed the room to believe she had been managed, not dismissed. Reduced, not removed. A collectible returned to storage. The guests watched eagerly, unaware they were being positioned as witnesses rather than participants. Damon's voice softened again, adopting that familiar tone of benevolent authority. "Some goodbyes," he said, "are necessary." Sophia felt the trap closing, but she also felt something else, something he had never accounted for. Preparation. She had lived quietly for years, but she had not been idle. Damon believed invisibility meant absence. He had never understood the power of working unnoticed, of thinking without interruption, of planning without permission. She took one more step forward. The movement was subtle, but it shifted the room. People leaned in again, not because Damon directed them to, but because instinct told them something was changing. Damon noticed. His smile faltered just slightly. For the first time that night, Sophia saw uncertainty flicker across his perfect face. As Damon reached for the next line in his script, Sophia realized he wasn't prepared for the one she was about to rewrite. The contract sat on the podium like a challenge wrapped in legalese, unassuming to anyone who didn't know its true weight. Divorce papers, ironclad, irreversible. A document meant to sever not just a marriage, but a history, a life, an identity. Damon Croft rested his hand lightly on the stack, the surface glinting under the chandeliers, and smiled, a smile that radiated both charm and command. He leaned into the microphone, voice smooth, practiced, every syllable designed to land in the perfect place, in the perfect tone. "Please sign, Sophia. It's time to admit that a woman with a big heart and a humble background was never meant for the altitude of the Croft name." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd, a sound both shallow and sharp. It scraped against her ears, echoing in the hollows of her chest like a warning. She felt it, every time, that calculated dismissal, that unspoken message that her worth was measured not by her mind, not by her presence, but by how well she fit into his curated world. Her brown skin shone under the bright lights, but it was only ever seen as a decorative element. Her intelligence had been reduced again and again to a matter of charity, of benevolent acknowledgement, as if brilliance in a woman like her was cute, harmless, or something to be displayed like a rare vase on a pedestal. "I gave you the world," Damon continued, each word sliding out like a knife wrapped in velvet. "But you couldn't handle my world." His eyes locked onto hers, that familiar storm of cold blue, calculating her reaction, measuring hesitation, longing for fear, for compliance. He extended his hand and placed a pen onto the podium, as though granting permission to exist, or cease to exist, within the space he owned. Sophia's gaze didn't waver. Her fingers brushed the pen lightly, not yet taking it. She felt the weight of the room, the whispers, the stares, the sense that everyone was holding their breath for the fall she was expected to make. Every moment had been engineered to reduce her. Every glance from Damon was a reminder that she was supposed to shrink, to bow, to dissolve. But she didn't. She inhaled slowly, tasting the metallic tang of anticipation. The air felt heavier here than anywhere else, laden with expectation, power, and invisible chains. Every eye in the room seemed to pierce her, measuring how much she could endure before she broke, before the carefully constructed narrative Damon had spun for them all became reality. Her hand hovered over the pen. Damon's lips curved into a faint smile, confident, smug, practiced. He thought he owned her hesitation. He thought the room, the lights, the microphones, the crystal chandeliers, all of it had given him the upper hand. "You know," he said, leaning slightly forward, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "I never imagined it would come to this. But life teaches lessons. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. And you, Sophia," his tone softened, deceptively tender, "you were always better suited to the quiet corners, to the safe shadows." The room laughed again, softly, as if confirming his narrative. Sophia's lips pressed together. The air between them felt taut, electric, a wire straining to snap. He extended the pen slightly closer, his wrist brushing the edge of the podium as if that touch would remind her who was in control. His smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Sign, and we can both move on. Your world can be as humble as you always claimed it should be, and I can continue building at the heights that suit me." It was supposed to hurt. It was supposed to silence her. That had been the plan. She glanced around the room briefly, just enough to catch the flicker in a few faces. Shock, curiosity, a silent question. Will she comply? But they didn't understand the stakes. They didn't see what she had spent years preparing for, hidden beneath smiles and quiet obedience. They didn't know that invisibility could be a weapon. Her eyes returned to Damon. He leaned slightly, confident, smug, certain. He didn't know that the very pen he had placed before her was not just a tool of submission. It was a gateway to reclamation. Sophia's hand lifted slowly, brushing the pen as though testing its weight. Her mind replayed years of unseen work, of every calculation Damon had ignored, of every blueprint she had drawn, every structural flaw he had dismissed, every hidden corner of this mansion that bore her fingerprint, but not her name. He thought he had built a stage for her silence. He had built it over decades. Every light fixture, every camera, every step of this public humiliation had been meticulously choreographed. And yet, that stage was about to be transformed. Her voice, when it finally came, was low, calm, and deliberate. "Damon," she said, not a question, not a plea, just her name, a declaration, a reminder of presence. "You always assumed I would vanish quietly, that I would sign, nod, and disappear into the background like I've been trained to do." Damon blinked. For a brief moment, the practiced smile faltered. Not entirely, it never fully left him, but a shadow flickered across his eyes. She didn't move to sign. Not yet. The crowd murmured, sensing tension. Something was different. Something had shifted. Their collective expectation hung in the air like fragile glass. She placed the pen down gently, almost mockingly, like a challenge disguised as compliance, and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice rang out, clear, measured, the quiet power of someone who had waited years for the right moment. "You think this document defines me," she said, "that your words can reduce the sum of my life to a single signature on a page. You've forgotten one thing." Her eyes scanned the audience, letting the weight of her presence settle. "I built more than this house. I built the foundation that held your empire together while you polished its facade. Every curve, every support, every detail, my hands, my mind. Yet you never saw it. You never saw me. Gasps whispered through the crowd. Some stiffened, others leaned forward, unsure of what was happening. Damon's jaw tightened. That shadow in his eyes deepened, because what she had just said was not protest. It was fact. And fact had no fear. The audience had arrived expecting spectacle. Damon had promised humiliation. What they received instead was the quiet assertion of a power they had overlooked entirely. Sophia lifted her chin slightly. Her gaze locked on his, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with clarity. You built a stage for my silence, she continued softly, but every stage is only as strong as the foundation beneath it, and foundations remember everything. A subtle click echoed beneath the marble floorboards, almost imperceptible, but Sophia felt it. A small mechanism she had installed years ago, overlooked by Damon, linked to the estate's private archives. It was one of countless hidden redundancies she had designed to protect her intellectual property, her voice, her work. He had never expected it, because he never looked closely. He had assumed invisibility meant absence. He had always assumed she would remain quiet. She had not. Sophia straightened fully. The murmurs in the room grew. Damon's perfect composure was cracking, minutely but unmistakably. He shifted, recalculated, leaned into the microphone again, voice a notch sharper. "Enough theatrics," he said, a subtle edge betraying the first, real hint of frustration that night. "Sign the papers, Sophia, or make this spectacle even more uncomfortable for yourself." Her fingers hovered over the pen once more, poised not to submit, but to reclaim. She felt every eye on her, every expectation pressing down, and yet for the first time in years, the pressure didn't weigh her down. It sharpened her, it focused her. Because tonight, she wasn't silent. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. She was ready. As Sophia's hand moved toward the pen, a faint hum vibrated through the floorboards. The mansion itself was beginning to respond, quietly, deliberately, to the one person Damon had always assumed would obey. And in that moment she knew. The stage he had built for her silence might soon become the arena of his undoing. Her fingers hovered above the pen longer than anyone expected. Not from fear, not from hesitation, but because memory had weight. Heavy, persistent, subtle, yet undeniable. Each line of graphite, each mark of ink in her mind reminded her who she had been before Damon Croft decided she should be invisible. She felt every late night, every whisper of ambition stifled, every quiet compromise she had made to preserve peace in a house that had never truly belonged to her. She remembered those nights vividly, nights when the mansion was silent except for the faint hum of electricity, the faint groan of settling stone, and the scratch of pencil against blueprint. She would sit cross-legged on the floor, tracing curves of walls, calculating load-bearing columns, adjusting windows so sunlight would fall just so, ensuring every room was both grand and functional. Damon slept beside power, beside the warmth of inherited privilege, oblivious to the fact that this building, the pride of his empire, was carried on the strength of her mind. She remembered signing away her career, temporarily, the way he had demanded, the subtle way he had suggested she would get back to architecture, that the world would wait while she focused on him, on the house, on appearances. She had believed him once. She had believed that compromise was love, that patience would be rewarded. That faith had been her first lesson in erasure. She remembered his words, lightly tossed as if to charm, as if to comfort. How he had called her ideas cute when they were brilliant. How he had praised her, but only superficially, as if brilliance in a woman like her needed approval to exist. She had laughed politely, accepted the praise, and tucked the sting beneath her ribs. Her fingers brushed the pen lightly, not to submit, but to measure its weight, to confirm it was real, that the power it represented was tangible, but not insurmountable. She inhaled slowly, letting the cool air from the cliffside terrace brush against her face, steadying her heart. The room held its collective breath. Every eye in the hall seemed drawn to her hand, the pen, the invisible threshold between compliance and assertion. Her voice, when it finally came, was low, precise, and deliberate. "You always focused on the facade, Damon," she said, not raising her tone but letting the cadence of her words carry authority. It was the kind of quiet command that forced attention without demanding it. She could see some guests leaning forward instinctively, curiosity pricking their otherwise polite detachment. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down, but it did not crush her. It sharpened her. "You forgot the first rule of building," she continued, letting her gaze sweep the audience briefly. "Weak foundations guarantee spectacular collapse." A murmur ran through the crowd, like a ripple on still water. Damon's smile twitched ever so slightly, a hint of tension that went unnoticed by most, but Sophia saw it. Years of reading him had taught her the subtle language of cracks in perfection. The twitch of a jaw, the narrowing of eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before a word is spoken. They all meant something. She lifted the pen fully, ink gleaming under the chandelier lights. It was not a surrender. It was the heralding of something new. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed it to the paper and began to sign. Each stroke was measured, almost ceremonious. The audience felt the gravity before the meaning fully registered. This was the culmination of years spent in shadows, of brilliance hidden beneath expectation. Her hand shook only once, tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was not weakness. It was acknowledgement of every year spent sacrificing for someone who had never truly seen her. It was the weight of memory pressing into action. Damon leaned forward slightly, masking impatience with controlled charm. "Excellent," he murmured, a faint edge betraying the first crack in his carefully sculpted confidence. "Sign quickly, Sophia, and we can move on." She completed the signature, pressed the final stroke into the paper, and then she paused. The pause was deliberate, long enough to feel the shifting air, to sense the collective tension rising. Everyone had assumed submission, but what followed was something else entirely. She placed the pen down gently, not carelessly, but like a conductor lowering a baton at the peak of a symphony. The gesture was small, unassuming, but it carried authority. It was the first act of a reclamation no one in the room had been prepared to witness. Damon's blue eyes narrowed fractionally. His practiced smile faltered again, a whisper of unease passing over the flawless mask he wore. Something in him recognized that this signature, though obedient in appearance, was not surrender. There was intention, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. It was the spark of control shifting from him to her. Sophia straightened fully, shoulders back, chin lifted. Her presence filled the space with a quiet gravity. She no longer occupied a shadow. She did not shrink into corners. She exuded clarity, authority, and the weight of intellect unacknowledged for too long. The guests shifted, sensing the subtle imbalance. The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered, almost involuntarily, "Is she going to speak?" Damon cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. "Now let us proceed," he said, voice artificially steady, the edge sharper than before. "This is merely formalities, isn't it, Sophia? A conclusion to a mutual understanding?" Her eyes glimmered, not with anger, but calculation, not with fear, but preparation. She had seen this play before, from boardrooms to charity galas, every time Damon believed his control unshakable. He always assumed that presence equaled compliance. He never understood that quiet calculation could outmatch aggression. "Yes," she said softly, almost conversationally, but the tone carried weight, gravitas. The room heard compliance, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, reclaiming. She had anticipated every movement, every word, every assumption Damon had placed in this room. Her gaze swept over the legal team standing near the podium, the cameras, the assistants. Every person who thought they understood the power dynamics was about to witness an unforeseen variable, one they had never considered. She straightened even further, placing both hands lightly on the podium. The audience leaned in unconsciously, drawn to the quiet authority radiating from her. Every step Damon had taken to build this narrative of humiliation had ignored one simple fact. Intelligence cannot be erased. Skill cannot be hidden indefinitely. And preparation, when underestimated, becomes unstoppable. Damon's eyes flicked toward the chandeliers, then to the floor, then back to her. He realized, too late, that the signature, so carefully framed as submission, was not submission at all. Every stroke he thought had bound her had activated clauses he had never read, protections he had assumed were irrelevant. Every minute he had spent planning this spectacle had overlooked her foresight. Sophia lifted her head higher, letting the silence stretch. The room felt suspended, caught between expectation and revelation. The pen had done more than mark a document. It had marked the moment when the unseen architect began reclaiming her narrative. She let the room feel the weight of her presence before speaking again. "Foundations remember everything," she said, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering. "Even those who build with arrogance, believing their touch will erase the hands that supported them, will eventually discover that history is written by those who prepared while unnoticed." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Damon's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her entirely. He had thought the pen would finalize control, but it had instead unleashed the first act of his unraveling. Sophia straightened fully, taking a deliberate step back from the podium. She did not retreat. She did not look away. The room was hers, not because she had claimed it, but because she had always been ready to do so. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the podium. Every curve of her fingers, every small movement, communicated confidence, strategy, and the quiet inevitability of the twist she had prepared for years. And in that moment, Damon Croft realized something horrifying. The woman he had spent 12 years controlling had never been under his control at all. She had been waiting, calculating, preparing for this precise instant. The crowd could feel it now. The air thickened. The silence stretched taut. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the narrative Damon had scripted was cracking, exposing hidden foundations, hidden power, hidden truth. Sophia lifted her gaze to him. Her brown eyes glimmered under the light. Calm, precise, lethal in their clarity. "You built a stage for my silence," she said softly. "But every stage only amplifies the voice of the one who refuses to be erased." Damon's lips parted slightly, the first real lapse in composure. The carefully constructed mask, perfected over years, showed a hint of fear, a glimpse of vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to see. She straightened again, letting the moment linger. Every guest was leaning forward now, sensing the shift. Something monumental had begun. The pen was no longer a tool of submission. It was a signal. The foundation had shifted. The game had changed. As Sophia's eyes met Damon's, she felt the faint vibration beneath the marble floorboards, the mansion itself responding to the architect it had always belonged to, quietly awakening mechanisms he had never anticipated. And she knew in that instant the next move would not just challenge him, it would undo him completely. The room felt suspended in time. A silence heavier than any she had ever endured settled over the gala. Not the polite hush of curiosity, not the respectful pause of social decorum, but a tension so tangible it seemed to press against the skin of every guest. The air was thick, as if the mansion itself held its breath. waiting for the next act in a performance Damon believed he was controlling. The signature she had pressed into the papers moments ago carried far more weight than anyone in the room realized. Years ago, when the apex had existed only as sketches on a drafting table, Sophia had written a clause into the deed, hidden, buried under layers of legalese so precise, so deliberate, that it was nearly invisible to all but someone trained to read between the lines, to see what others overlooked. Intellectual property and usage rights of the apex, the house, every curve, every hidden system, every detail of its design, belonged to the architect. And that architect was Sophia. Damon had never asked. He had never read. He had assumed ownership simply because he had named the house, because he had poured money into it, because the world recognized him as the visionary. But vision without design is nothing. Without the architect, the apex was only stone, glass, and hollow arrogance. The moment her pen lifted, the room shifted subtly. Not immediately obvious, but enough for someone paying attention to feel it. The chandeliers seemed to glimmer differently. The polished floors reflected light in a new pattern, as if the building itself acknowledged the hand that had truly created it. Guests unconsciously leaned forward, sensing a fracture in the narrative they had been fed. They didn't know what was happening, but they could feel the balance tilting. Sophia did not smile. There was no triumph in her expression. She had no need for the satisfaction of spectacle. Her power was quiet, lethal, patient. She stepped back from the podium deliberately, every movement measured, and reached for the microphone. The room, conditioned by years of Damon's control and her own expected compliance, instinctively turned toward her. "You built a home," she said, voice low and steady, "on the assumption that control was in your hands." Damon's hand twitched near the papers. He had rehearsed his response, had rehearsed the humiliation he would impose, had rehearsed the applause that would follow. But she didn't continue with apology, with hesitation, with concession. She continued with fact. "Every beam, every wall, every secret server, every hidden corner," she said, letting each phrase settle into the room, "was designed by me, and the law confirms it." A murmur began at the edges of the crowd. A whisper ran along the terraces and balconies, the faint exchange of uncertainty. The legal counsel, who had been rehearsed to nod politely at Damon's commands, stiffened. Papers rustled. One guest nearly dropped a glass, startled by the sudden weight of authenticity in her voice. Damon stepped forward slightly, trying to reclaim presence, trying to force the narrative back into the space he had designed. "Sophia," he said, voice controlled but tight, "this is merely formal." "It is not merely formal," she interrupted, calm but unwavering. "It is binding. The clause I wrote years ago makes me the rightful owner of the Apex's intellectual property. Your name is not attached. My work is recognized. Your assumption of ownership ends the moment my pen touched the paper." She paused, letting the words linger like a strike in still air. Eyes widened, hands froze mid-toast. The murmurs swelled. The room no longer existed as a backdrop for Damon's brilliance. It existed for the revelation that had been quietly hidden all along. Damon's carefully rehearsed composure faltered imperceptibly. His smile, which had seemed permanent, now cracked at the edges. He attempted to recover with charm, with flattery, with the familiar ease he had always used to manipulate perception. "Sophia," he said, leaning in slightly, "think about what you're saying. We can—" "You never thought it mattered who designed it," she said, voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the room. "You never asked. You assumed your investment equaled ownership. You never considered that a brilliant mind might see farther than a bank account, might plan deeper than money, might safeguard the future while you polished the present." The crowd had gone still. Their curiosity was now raw, their disbelief palpable. Many had assumed Damon's brilliance alone had created the apex. Now their minds strained against this new reality. The house, The mansion that represented power and prestige was legally hers. Every blueprint, every calculation, every concealed feature bore her name, even if no one had ever noticed it. Damon's hand flexed. His perfect blue eyes, which had always conveyed effortless control, flickered with something sharper, colder, sharper still. Recognition that he had been blind, that the narrative he had relied on, that the image of absolute power was cracking beneath the weight of her quiet intellect. Sophia straightened fully, her presence commanding, though her voice remained measured. "You assumed my silence meant consent," she said. "You assumed compliance equaled ownership. You were wrong. You built the apex thinking it belonged to you, but every secret, every safeguard, every hidden clause was mine. You overlooked it because you never truly saw me. And now the law confirms it." The room felt electric. Each guest instinctively checked the documents, the legal team whispering, a flurry of uncertainty spreading like wildfire. The hum of disbelief grew. Cameras recording the gala captured every twitch, every reaction, every imperceptible shift of power. Damon's lips pressed together. He tried to speak again, but the sound caught in his throat. Every argument he had prepared, every clever deflection, every rehearsed humiliation evaporated under the weight of undeniable fact. Sophia's gaze swept the audience, then returned to him. Her eyes were not cold. They were resolute, precise, full of quiet inevitability. "You built a stage for me to be erased," she said, voice steady, clear, calm. "But the architect is always remembered, and the law confirms what the world should have seen long ago." She lowered the microphone slightly, signaling the end of the declaration. Not triumphantly, not dramatically, simply, firmly. The crowd was silent, processing, recalculating, reassessing everything they had believed. Damon's jaw tightened. His carefully cultivated aura of control wavered. For the first time in years, he realized that power could not simply be assumed, that brilliance and foresight could not be erased, and that invisibility did not mean absence. Sophia's hands rested lightly on the podium. Every subtle gesture radiated command. Every quiet movement reflected years of unseen preparation. Her signature had done more than formalize a legal clause. It had shifted the entire balance of authority in the room. The guests felt it instinctively. The gala no longer belonged to Damon. It belonged to the woman who had been underestimated, ignored, and erased, but never absent. The hidden mechanisms she had designed, the servers she had programmed, the clauses she had written, they were now alive in effect, a silent army of evidence, protection, and undeniable ownership. Damon had overlooked every detail, every precaution, every subtle safeguard, and now all of it was hers. The room was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the chandeliers, the subtle creak of marble, and the almost imperceptible vibrations of the hidden systems that had silently ensured her control. Every eye in the crowd now turned to her, not Damon, the architect, the mind behind the creation, the one who had quietly orchestrated the final, irreversible act. Damon took a step forward, finally speaking in a voice sharper, quieter, controlled but tinged with fear. You realize what this means?" Sophia's brown eyes met his. Calm, precise, measured. "I do. And I also know that you never truly saw me." Her words were a blade slicing through years of illusion, public perception, and his assumed supremacy. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether to applaud, unsure how to process the unraveling spectacle. Every step Damon had taken to orchestrate control had been rendered irrelevant by a single pen, a single clause, and a single woman who had never been silent, only unseen. As Sophia lowered the microphone and the first murmurs of realization rippled through the audience, A faint vibration hummed beneath the marble floorboards, a hidden server silently activating, revealing evidence Damon had believed buried forever. And in that instant, she knew. The next move would not just reclaim the apex, it would expose every secret he thought safe. Her voice carried across the grand hall, not loud, not dramatic, not a plea for attention, but precise, deliberate, measured. Every word held the weight of years lived in silence, of brilliance hidden beneath expectation, of recognition long overdue. Damon calls this his crowning achievement, she said, her brown eyes scanning the crowd, letting each phrase settle into the air like a stone thrown into still water. The word his hung in the air, a subtle emphasis that the audience caught without understanding the full magnitude. She wasn't speaking to them. She was addressing the man who had underestimated her every single day for over a decade. The room stiffened. It was the kind of stillness that feels almost unnatural, like the air itself has paused to listen. He was expecting tears, hesitation, apology, or humiliation. None of it came. She spoke with the authority of someone who had been unseen but never absent. He believed because I'm a woman, and because my skin is darker than his, that I was decorative, she continued. The word decorative was sharp, cutting through the polite atmosphere, slicing the false narratives Damon had built around her, around their marriage, and around his public persona. It was the first time the room had felt the sting of his control being directly challenged. The chandeliers reflected her words in fragmented glimmers, as if even the architecture of the apex understood the weight she carried. Some guests shifted, uncomfortably aware that the narrative they had been invited to witness was collapsing before their eyes. Others leaned in, sensing that the facade Damon had so meticulously maintained was cracking, but unsure what lay behind the fracture. But I designed every beam, every window, every curve, she said, each word deliberate, each syllable a strike against the illusion he had curated. And unlike him, I built something that tells the truth. Her tone was neither accusatory nor bitter. It was precise, absolute. Every eye in the room felt drawn to the clarity of her statement. For the first time, the invisible woman had become impossible to ignore. A screen behind her flickered to life. Light spread across the wall like a dawn breaking through fog. Blueprints glimmered under the gallery lights. Every line, every annotation, every meticulous note was hers. Her handwriting flowed across the screen with deliberate elegance, the mark of someone who had built not for show, but for endurance, for integrity, for truth. The audience gasped quietly. Some leaned in, tracing the curves and beams with their eyes. The sophistication, the precision, the sheer intelligence of the design became undeniable. It was as if the house itself had been speaking through her for years, whispering its architect's identity, finally visible to the world. Damon's perfectly controlled composure faltered, his lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing, blue steel against brown fire. He had assumed control would never slip, that the world would always see the apex through his lens, his name emblazoned as the creator. He had ignored her contributions, diminished them, buried them beneath charm and status. But the evidence was irrefutable now. Sophia stepped forward, letting the microphone amplify her calm authority. "You thought invisibility meant absence," she said, voice even and cutting through the murmurs. "You never considered that someone could be present in every hidden system, every hidden calculation, every blueprint, without ever needing recognition." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Some whispered to their neighbors. Others instinctively reached for phones, unsure whether this revelation was part of the evening's scripted spectacle or something far more consequential. Damon's eyes flicked to the legal team. His carefully rehearsed arguments, his plans to control perception, suddenly felt inadequate. His hands flexed at his sides. For the first time, he realized that the woman he had called invisible had prepared for this moment, anticipated every possible contingency, and had done so in silence. She raised a hand slightly, gesturing toward the screen. "You thought your wealth and your name were enough to mask the truth," she continued. "But every hidden detail, every secret archive, every overlooked safeguard was mine. I built this house for permanence. I built it to endure scrutiny, and now the world can finally see what was always there." The blueprints rotated across the screen, revealing layers Damon had never acknowledged. Reinforced foundations, hidden communication lines, secure archives, structural innovations, every element a testament to her skill and foresight. Every line screamed ownership, intelligence, and inevitability. Damon stepped forward, trying to regain control of the narrative, voice smooth but strained. "Sophia, this is unnecessary. You're making a scene." She did not flinch. Her gaze remained locked on him, unwavering. "You think humility is weakness," she said softly. "You think silence is submission. You have been watching the facade for years, Damon, and never once looked at the person holding it together from behind the curtains." The audience was leaning in now. Cameras caught every glance, every subtle motion. The gala, once a celebration of Damon's empire, had become an exposure of truth. The apex was no longer merely a mansion. It was the tangible proof of her genius, her labor, her invisibility transformed into undeniable presence. Damon's jaw tightened. He tried a small smile, the kind he had used for decades to control perception, to charm and redirect. But it faltered almost immediately. Something had shifted in the room, in the energy, in the very air. His control was slipping. Every witness, every observer, every camera lens now reframed the story. He was no longer the architect of perception. He was a spectator to the revelation. Sophia lifted her hand slightly again. Her movements were subtle, but the intention was clear. "You thought you could hide behind appearances," she said. "You never saw me. But every beam, every hidden feature, every secret archive, they were mine. And the world will finally see what I built, even if you never could." Gasps spread through the crowd. The murmurs escalated. Some faces showed admiration, others shock. And Damon, he realized that the stage he had built for humiliation had become the platform for his own unraveling. Every calculated word, every rehearsed gesture, every expectation of submission had been inverted. She paused, letting the weight of her words and the evidence on the screen sink in. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to sync with hers. The apex itself felt alive, humming beneath their feet, as if responding to the one it was truly built for. Her eyes never left Damon's. Calm, precise, absolute. "You believed your name alone would define the legacy of this house," she said. "But names fade, skill endures, integrity outlasts arrogance, foundations remember, and you, Damon, built yours on sand while I built mine on truth." A flicker of panic crossed Damon's eyes. Brief, but it betrayed the first real crack in his carefully crafted persona. He realized, finally, that the invisible woman he had controlled, ignored, and dismissed was now controlling him. That her voice, calm and unyielding, was shaping the story the world would remember. The crowd's energy shifted, cameras panned, guests whispered, and a new awareness filled the room. The apex was hers, the accolades, the recognition, the unseen labor, all of it finally visible. Damon's perfect gala, meant to showcase his empire and humiliate his wife, had become the unveiling of her genius. Sophia lowered the microphone slightly, signaling the next phase of her plan, though she did not speak further yet. The blueprints remained, evidence of every calculation, every hidden safeguard, every act of ingenuity that had gone unnoticed for years. Damon's lips parted, attempting to regain composure, to assert authority. "Sophia, this isn't—" But no one waited for him. His words dissolved into the tension of the room, meaningless against the weight of truth that now dominated every glance, every thought, every heartbeat. Sophia allowed herself a single, small, controlled breath. Every inch of her presence radiated confidence, clarity, and authority. She had been invisible for too long, and now the world would see her as she had always been, brilliant, meticulous, and unshakably present. The murmurs intensified. Some guests reached for their phones, some whispered to neighbors, some simply froze, unsure how to respond to the collapse of Damon's narrative. And Damon, he realized that for the first time in his life, his charm, his wealth, and his name were insufficient to command attention. They had been eclipsed by the quiet brilliance of the woman he had always underestimated. Sophia's gaze swept across the room one final time before she turned fully to the screen, letting the evidence speak for itself. The blueprints, the archives, the hidden designs, all pointed to the same undeniable truth. She was the architect. She always had been. And Damon, he finally understood that control had never been his to hold. A faint hum echoed through the hidden systems of the apex, nearly imperceptible. The screens began to pulse subtly, revealing files Damon had believed were buried forever. Sophia smiled faintly. The moment had come, and the evidence he had ignored for years was about to speak. The display shifted silently, almost imperceptibly at first, then with the weight of inevitability. Hidden schematics emerged, a network of secrets Damon had assumed were invisible to everyone. Server rooms embedded beneath marble floors, encrypted vaults concealed behind walls of glass, data tunnels woven into the bones of the apex itself. Every hidden compartment, every secure archive, every secret passage illuminated on the screen, as if the mansion itself were lifting a veil. Sophia's finger traced a line across the blueprint, slow, deliberate, precise. The crowd followed, their eyes wide, struggling to reconcile the luxury and elegance they had admired with the intricate, clandestine infrastructure now revealed. Every crystal chandelier reflected light off lines they had never noticed, and every polished floor mirrored the paths of intelligence and design hidden beneath their feet. "You thought you were hiding your crimes in my home," Sophia said. Her voice was calm, measured, controlled. Not a plea, not an accusation, an undeniable truth. The words carried across the room like a current, touching every ear, sinking into every consciousness. A low murmur rose among the guests, quickly replaced by gasps. Shock replaced laughter, curiosity replaced indifference, tension replaced polite applause. The realization spread. The house they had admired as a testament to Damon's power had always belonged to someone else. "You were building evidence for me," she continued, letting the syllables fall with the weight of inevitability. Every word struck with precision, designed to resonate in the ears of those who had assumed Damon's world was untouchable. Damon's lips parted, a faint tremor betraying his panic. For years he had believed every corner of this mansion was his dominion, every secret within it his to protect. He had assumed that wealth, status, and charm could mask negligence. He had assumed she was silent, pliable, decorative. He had assumed wrong. The audience was frozen, caught between disbelief and fascination. Some leaned in instinctively, as if closer observation could somehow make sense of the impossibility. Some whispered to their neighbors, barely audible, trying to process the revelation. The woman they had dismissed, the invisible wife, had controlled every secret, every safeguard, every hidden layer of the house. "You spent 12 years looking at me and only seeing your own generosity," Sophia said, voice soft, lethal in its precision. Every word drew a line through the decades of manipulation, of assumed superiority, of erasure. "You never saw the architect holding this life together." The screen flickered slightly, revealing a live feed of the hidden server rooms, encrypted files now accessible only because she held the knowledge, the authority, and the legal power to activate them. Digital blueprints overlaid the physical layout of the mansion, every encrypted vault, every surveillance blind spot, every hidden passageway traced in luminous clarity. Damon's perfect face cracked. The flawless composure he had worn for years splintered in the face of undeniable truth. The first real cracks of panic appeared in his blue eyes. He had believed control was a matter of money, presence, and charm. He had been wrong. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some murmured questions to their neighbors, others could only stare, unable to believe the woman they had dismissed as quiet and subdued had orchestrated such a revelation. Cameras zoomed in on the lines of code streaming across the display, capturing evidence of the magnitude of her intelligence and foresight. Sophia's gaze remained locked on Damon, calm, calculated. Every subtle movement, every measured breath, radiated authority. She was not speaking to the crowd. She was speaking to him and through him to every person who had ever doubted her presence. "You built walls to hide your secrets," she said softly, "but every wall I designed was a witness. Every beam, every vent, every cable was intentionally placed. You thought invisibility meant compliance. You were wrong. You built a home for evidence, and I am the one who holds it." The crowd absorbed the statement with growing tension. Polite applause had vanished, replaced by a charged, almost tangible energy. The apex was no longer simply a mansion. It was proof, record, instrument of revelation. Damon's hands clenched, fingers whitening. He had rehearsed dominance, rehearsed charm, rehearsed humiliation, but none of it accounted for strategy, foresight, and patience measured over 12 years. He realized with dawning horror that the control he had assumed was never his. Sophia stepped closer to the podium, letting the weight of her presence anchor every eye in the room. "You assumed your generosity was enough to define me, to contain me, to erase me," she said, voice steady. "You were mistaken. The foundation of your world has always been fragile. Mine, it was deliberate, hidden, unstoppable." Screens shifted, revealing more layers of hidden infrastructure. Vaults designed for sensitive documents, servers holding proof of transactions, contracts, and manipulations Damon had assumed were invisible. Digital footprints and physical evidence intertwined, a latticework of proof that she alone could access. The audience's fascination grew into awe. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps into stunned silence. Every person present realized that the invisible woman they had dismissed had not only survived the world Damon built, but had mastered it in ways he never imagined. Damon's voice faltered. He tried to speak, to assert control, but the words stuck in his throat. Every rehearsed argument dissolved under the weight of her revelation. Every assumption, every act of hubris was exposed. Sophia's hands rested lightly on the podium. Every inch of her posture radiated calm authority. Every gesture communicated the inevitability of the moment. She had always been prepared for this instant, anticipating every move, every misstep, every presumption of her erasure. "You believed that silence could be manipulated," she continued. "That invisibility meant weakness, but every hidden feature, every encryption, every clause, every beam, every line of code, it has been mine. And today the truth is visible." Gasps grew louder. Some guests instinctively checked phones, eager to capture the revelation. Others simply stared, unable to reconcile Damon's image with the woman now commanding the room. Damon's hands flexed nervously. He realized that every strategy, every display of power, every carefully rehearsed expression was meaningless. Authority had shifted. Recognition had shifted. The world had begun to see the architect, not the heir. Sophia's gaze swept the room one last time, lingering on Damon. "You assumed a woman like me could only be decorative," she said, calm, precise, unwavering. "You were wrong. The house has always been listening, and now it speaks, and the world will hear it. The room felt as though it held its breath. Every device, every camera, every human eye was focused on her. The mansion itself seemed alive, every hidden system humming as if acknowledging her command. Damon took a step back, realizing, with the cold clarity of fear, that control had shifted irreversibly. His name, wealth, and charm no longer commanded attention. He was exposed. Sophia straightened fully, voice carrying a quiet, unstoppable authority. "You spent 12 years watching me, seeing only what you wanted," she said. "But now everything you tried to hide is illuminated, and I am the one holding it." The murmurs rippled into stunned silence. Cameras panned, capturing every subtle reaction, every crack in Damon's composure, every trace of awe in the audience. The apex was hers, not just the structure, but the story, the proof, the power. The screen pulsed lightly, as if the mansion itself recognized the moment of revelation. Every hidden room, every encrypted vault, every secret tunnel radiated significance now, their purpose clear. They were her legacy and her evidence. Damon's lips parted, trying to regain control, trying to command respect, trying to reclaim the narrative. "Sophia, you don't understand." But no one listened. No one could. The crowd had shifted allegiance through the sheer weight of undeniable truth. Damon's authority had crumbled quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly. Sophia smiled faintly, the calm of certainty etched into her features. The invisible woman had spoken. The architect had revealed herself, and the foundation Damon had relied upon was no longer under his command. The screens pulsed again, revealing a folder Damon had believed secure for decades. The file name glimmered ominously. The apex, evidence of everything. Sophia's finger hovered over it. One press, and the world would see what Damon had spent a lifetime hiding. And in that instant, she realized, what she was about to reveal would change everything. Not just his empire, but his life. Damon stepped forward, his movements unpracticed, unpolished, betraying the cracks in his carefully maintained persona. The confident, poised figure who had dominated rooms, headlines, and boardrooms now appeared smaller, less than the sum of his reputation. His blue eyes, once sharp and commanding, wavered under the weight of exposure. "Sophia, please," he said, voice raw, stripped of all pretense. The polished cadence he had relied upon for years had vanished, leaving only a man confronted by the consequences of his own blindness. Every syllable carried a desperate longing, a recognition of his error, and a stark vulnerability that had never existed in his public persona. "I love the warmth you brought to my cold world," he added, reaching instinctively toward her, as if contact alone could repair a decade of misjudgment. His hand extended, fingers trembling slightly, but Sophia did not flinch. She did not respond. The gesture, meant to bridge a chasm, only emphasized the distance he had created through years of arrogance. The room felt heavier. Every guest was acutely aware that the facade of Damon Croft, the untouchable mogul, had been shattered. Whispers ran along the terraces. Cameras shifted focus, capturing the once imposing man reduced to pleading, unsteady, human. There was no charm left. There was only raw exposure. "Don't prove them right," he continued, desperation threading his voice. "Don't let your emotions ruin my future." The words were rehearsed, desperate to manipulate, to reclaim control, but they rang hollow. The guests, the staff, the onlookers, all perceived the fragility now, the absence of power where he had assumed supremacy. Sophia's eyes, calm, brown, and luminous under the gallery lights, remained fixed on him. No fear, no anger, only clarity. For 12 years, she had been invisible, underestimated, dismissed. But she had also been deliberate, strategic, and unyielding. She had prepared for this exact moment, and she had the strength to see it through. He stepped closer, unaware of the invisible boundaries she had set. His hand trembled again, the nearest approximation of vulnerability he had ever displayed publicly. "I can change," he pleaded softly, voice breaking. "I can be different. I can—" "You can't change what you refused to see for 12 years," Sophia interrupted, voice measured, deliberate, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Your perception has always been filtered through ego, through pride, through the illusion that control equates understanding. But you never understood me. Not then. Not now." The murmurs among the guests escalated. Some whispered with fascination, others with awe. Cameras caught every detail, the subtle widening of eyes, the tremor in his jaw, the hand reaching for air as though it could grasp the fleeting remnants of authority. Damon's composure, already fractured, began to crumble entirely. The polite, cold arrogance that had masked his control now peeled away to reveal a man unprepared for confrontation with someone who had quietly mastered every detail he overlooked. "You don't understand," he said again, quieter this time, a whisper almost lost in the tension. I never meant—" "You never saw," Sophia replied softly, voice steady but edged with unmistakable truth. "You assumed visibility equals contribution. You assumed that compliance equals acknowledgement. You assumed my silence was weakness. It was preparation." The crowd leaned in, sensing the emotional gravity unfolding before them. They had come expecting opulence, spectacle, and the comfortable narrative of a dominant mogul and his subdued spouse. Instead, they witnessed truth, unflinching and undeniable. Damon tried again, lifting a hand as though physical proximity could reclaim authority. "Sophia, I—" She shook her head minutely, not out of anger, but as a signal that the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. For the first time, Damon Croft, the man who had orchestrated entire cities, entire empires, entire lives, stood confronted by someone whose command was invisible yet absolute. "You are begging me to return to the life you designed for yourself, not the one I've built," she said, voice clear, soft, and unyielding. "You are pleading for control you lost, the moment you refused to see the architect holding it together. And I won't give it back." His shoulders slumped imperceptibly. The confident posture, the charm, the theatrical presence, all gone. For once, the billionaire could not command attention, could not redirect perception, could not hide behind influence. He was exposed, bare, vulnerable, human. "You don't understand what it means to hold a life together while being unseen," Sophia continued. "You never saw the nights I spent alone, working through designs, calculations, every decision you claimed credit for. You never acknowledged the mind behind the creation. You only cared about perception." The audience absorbed her words in silence. Every movement, every glance, every whispered realization seemed amplified in the tension of the hall. Cameras captured the smallest shifts, the flick of a finger, the tightening of a jaw, the widening of eyes, telling a story more powerful than any scripted gala ever could. Damon's voice cracked again, lower now, almost a whisper meant for her alone. I loved you," he said, desperation bleeding into sincerity. "I did. Love," Sophia interrupted softly, carefully, with the clarity of someone who had studied every detail of human interaction, "does not look like possession. It does not look like control. It does not look like erasure. You never loved me, Damon. You loved the aesthetic of having me. You loved the reflection of generosity you wanted the world to see. You never saw the architect. You never saw me." The crowd shifted. Some instinctively clutched their glasses. Others froze, caught between disbelief and the raw spectacle of truth unraveling before them. Cameras panned, capturing every flicker of recognition, every realization that the woman they had ignored for years was now absolute. Damon's hands trembled visibly. The once perfect face, the practiced composure, the polished smile, everything cracked. He tried to speak, tried to regain narrative control, tried to anchor himself in past power, but words failed him. Sophia stepped closer to the microphone, voice unwavering. You had 12 years to see me. 12 years to understand the mind, the labor, the life behind the walls you admired. You didn't. And now, you're pleading for something that was never yours to take. The murmurs grew into audible gasps. Cameras zoomed in on the screens behind her, displaying the encrypted systems, the hidden servers, the meticulous documentation of everything Damon had assumed invisible. The Apex was no longer just a mansion. It was a record, a monument to preparation, foresight, and truth. Damon's blue eyes, once full of command, now betrayed the first flickers of fear. For the first time, the control he had assumed was slipping beyond reach. He reached toward her again, voice barely audible. "Sophia, please." But she did not flinch. Her hands rested lightly on the podium, calm, deliberate, full of the authority she had earned invisibly. She had no need to speak louder, no need to gesture, no need to persuade. Her presence alone radiated the truth. "You wanted to control me," she said softly, each word deliberate. "To command the narrative, to define value, to erase presence. You failed. I am here, I am seen, I am recognized, and nothing you plead for can change that." The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. The tension was so thick that the chandeliers seemed to shiver in the ambient weight of revelation. Cameras captured every micro-expression, every tremor of his hands, every twitch of a jaw that had once been carved with perfection. Damon took a step back, voice barely audible. I can fix it." Sophia shook her head minutely. "No," she said, "there is nothing to fix. There is only truth, and the world will see it." His chest rose and fell rapidly. Every plan, every strategy, every carefully cultivated public persona had collapsed. For the first time, he saw himself as he truly was, small, vulnerable, exposed. The billionaire who had controlled appearances now stood powerless against preparation, foresight, and undeniable talent. The room was silent. Guests could hardly breathe, aware that they were witnessing not a spectacle of wealth, but a reckoning of intellect, persistence, and patience. Sophia's voice, calm, precise, and unwavering, carried the weight of every unseen effort, every ignored night, every labor unacknowledged. Damon's lips parted. Words failed. Breath failed. Authority failed. She tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning the audience and finally returning to him. "You have begged," she said softly, "but it was never my decision to give." And in that moment, the mansion itself seemed to hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration through the floors and walls. Every system, every hidden archive, every encrypted vault now pulsed with anticipation. It was a heartbeat of inevitability. A hidden compartment in the server room lit up on the display. Files Damon had assumed destroyed, suddenly visible. One folder glimmered ominously. The Apex. Secrets you never knew. Sophia's finger hovered over it. One press, and the world would witness not just his mistakes, but the scale of his deception. And in that instant she realized, releasing this truth would not only shatter Damon, it would change everything for everyone who had ever been silenced. Sophia's eyes filled, not with rage, not with malice, but with the weight of 12 years compressed into a single, devastating moment. Her gaze swept over the crowd, over Damon, over the walls of the Apex, as if the building itself had absorbed every silent tear, every unspoken word, every erased contribution. "You never loved me," she said softly, her voice carrying across the hushed room like a quiet, inevitable truth. Not an accusation, not a plea, but the declaration of reality long denied. Her breath caught, subtle, almost imperceptible, as though the weight of history pressed down against her chest. "You loved the aesthetic of having me," she continued, her words deliberate, cutting through the polite air of the gala like a scalpel. The crowd leaned in instinctively. Every guest could feel the raw sincerity in the room, the quiet authority of someone who had endured invisibility but had never been absent. A shiver of tension passed through Damon. His composure had already faltered, but now the edge of truth pierced deeper than strategy, charm, or wealth could conceal. His lips parted slightly as if to respond, but the words failed. They had failed long ago, and now they failed again. "You loved that my blackness made your success look bigger," Sophia said, eyes glinting with an unspoken force. "Every compliment about my appearance, every nod to exotic beauty, every smile you directed my way, it was never about me. It was about the reflection of your greatness." The audience went still. Even the servers moving quietly along the edge of the room paused mid-step. Cameras caught every detail, the subtle tightening of jaws, the widening of eyes, the faint tremor of a hand raised instinctively to hide discomfort. "You called my brilliance obedience," she said, letting the words hang in the air. The syllables were heavy with irony, truth, and sorrow. The word obedience reverberated in the minds of every person who had ever assumed the quiet, elegant wife was compliant by nature, when in truth she had been patient, strategic, and endlessly resourceful. Sophia's voice trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the accumulation of years spent defending invisible labor, invisible intellect, invisible presence. The tremor was human, raw, authentic, and in that tremble the room felt the weight of her life's sacrifices, her silences, her careful calculations. "My daughter deserves better," she said, and the words landed like stones. The name daughter gave weight, gravity, and direction to all that had preceded it. Lily, her child, her heart outside her body, had been the quiet motivation behind every compromise, every silent night of labor, every effort to maintain composure in a life dictated by Damon's perception. The room was silent. Not a murmur, not a whisper, just the tangible, almost oppressive weight of truth. Crystal chandeliers reflected the tension. The air seemed suspended, and the crowd instinctively leaned closer, as though proximity could absorb the gravity of her declaration. Damon's blue eyes, once unshakable, now betrayed the first flickers of genuine fear. He had built a life assuming control over perception, assuming authority over every visible and invisible element around him. Yet here, in the presence of undeniable truth, he realized that every calculation, every performance, every assumption had failed. Sophia's hands rested lightly on the podium, elegant and steady, but every inch of her presence radiated the power of restraint. She had waited for this moment. She had prepared for it. And now she was finally allowed to speak the words that had been accumulating for more than a decade. "You thought you could erase me," she continued, voice steady, resonant. "You thought that charm, wealth, and aesthetic dominance could make me invisible. But I was present. I built. I planned. I endured. And I survived. And now Lily will inherit not just my love, but my vision, my strength, my integrity." The audience absorbed the statement, some whispering softly to neighbors, others staring, mesmerized by the revelation of human endurance and brilliance against manipulation. Cameras zoomed, capturing micro-expressions, the tightening of Damon's jaw, the shift in shoulders, the subtle flare of nostrils in disbelief. "You thought your generosity could define me," she said. "You thought your compliments, your public praises, your curated appearances could cover the absence of recognition for the labor I performed. But generosity without acknowledgement is nothing. Power without respect is hollow. And influence without seeing the minds behind it is futile. Damon stepped forward again, hands outstretched, voice cracking. "Sophia, I... I can..." She did not flinch. She did not speak immediately. Her eyes, deep brown and unyielding, held his in a gaze that transcended fear, intimidation, or remorse. Her presence, quiet yet commanding, radiated the authority of one who had always been in control of her own narrative, even when invisible. "You never loved me, Damon," she said again, softer this time, like a quiet echo that reverberated through the hall. "You loved the reflection of your own power in me, and I will not allow that reflection to dictate my child's life, or mine." The murmurs in the audience grew into visible tension. People shifted in their seats, some moved closer to see the unfolding drama, others instinctively covered mouths, realizing the enormity of what was happening. Cameras zoomed on Damon's face, now pale, lips trembling, eyes wide, recognizing for the first time that control was slipping irreversibly. Sophia paused, one slow, deliberate breath, and the room collectively held theirs. Every eye in the hall, every lens of every camera, every breath of every guest was drawn to her. She had finally fully claimed presence, visibility, and authority. "My daughter deserves the truth," she continued. "Not the aesthetics of a father pretending to care, not the pretense of love as a tool of control. She deserves integrity. She deserves to see her mother stand, not kneel, not bow, not disappear. And that is what she will witness." Damon's hands clenched involuntarily. The polite, controlled arrogance that had been his shield now melted under the weight of exposure. For the first time, he realized that wealth, power, and charm could not protect him from truth spoken with strategy, patience, and undeniable authority. "You wanted to mold me," she said softly. "You wanted obedience. You wanted compliance. You wanted the illusion of submission. But I am not an illusion. I am the mind, the architect, the mother, and my voice will be heard." The audience remained silent, captivated, unable to intervene, caught in the tension between wealth and truth, perception and reality. Damon's gaze flitted across the room, seeing faces that had once admired him, now measuring him against the undeniable evidence of her voice, her declaration, her revelation. Her words continued, each measured, each deliberate. "I will not beg for respect. I will not plead for recognition. I will claim what I have earned, what I have built, and what is owed to me and my daughter. And in that, Damon, you will see the true power of persistence, of preparation, and of unwavering principle." Damon took a step backward, voice barely audible, almost a whisper. "Sophia, please." But she did not move. She had no need to. Her authority, her presence, her claim on the room, the house, the legacy, was absolute. The apex itself seemed to hum in resonance with her words, the hidden systems, the secured archives, the evidence all acknowledging the shift in control. "My daughter deserves better," she repeated, softly but firmly, letting the phrase anchor the room. Every eye caught it, every camera preserved it. Every person in attendance felt the weight of her declaration, the inevitability of truth. Damon's chest rose and fell rapidly. The empire he had assumed untouchable now trembled under the sheer force of exposure, clarity, and truth. His hands twitched as if to reach for control, but the opportunity had vanished. Sophia finally allowed a single breath, subtle and deliberate. The room held in suspended silence, captivated by the moment where history, recognition, and truth collided. The invisible woman was no longer invisible. The mother, the architect, the strategist, the human being was fully present, and no pleading, no wealth, no charm could change that. A faint vibration ran through the hidden server rooms, unnoticed by Damon but visible on the display screens. Files began to unlock automatically, time-stamped evidence revealing not only his negligence, but deliberate manipulations affecting countless lives. Sophia's lips curved slightly. She realized that exposing these files would not just end Damon's empire, it would ignite consequences far larger than anyone in the room could imagine. And in that instant, every guest felt the tension shift. The quiet power of the invisible woman was about to become unstoppable. Lily deserves a mother who teaches her that value lives in her mind, Sophia said, voice steady, yet threaded with the weight of years. The room went silent again, as though the words themselves carried the gravity of an entire lifetime. Every guest froze, every camera focused, every whispered expectation suspended. The crystal chandeliers above flickered in the reflection of countless, astonished eyes. Not in how quietly she stands beside powerful men, she continued, deliberately slow, every syllable landing like a deliberate beat of a drum. This was not accusation, it was declaration, a principle spoken aloud for the first time in years. Her brown skin glowed subtly under the white lights, her tears catching briefly before she blinked them away with deliberate grace. She wiped her tears, slow, deliberate, as though showing the audience that even grief could be a controlled weapon. Each motion had meaning. The past she had endured, the injustice she had survived, and the clarity of choice she now embodied. "I choose her future over your facade," she said finally. The words cut through the room like sunlight piercing storm clouds. The crowd felt the weight of the statement. Not just a divorce, not just a power shift, but the declaration that a life had been redirected, a child's legacy protected. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, almost like punctuation. The sound was subtle, but the tension they carried was unmistakable. Guests shifted in their seats, some glancing at each other, some toward the cliffside where the estate perched like a king's crown over the landscape. The apex itself seemed to breathe under the weight of revelation. Damon's blue eyes, wide and unsteady, darted toward the source of the sirens. He realized with a rush of panic that control had completely slipped through his fingers. Wealth, charm, legacy. None of it mattered if the truth could be revealed and enforced in real time. Sophia's gaze returned to him, calm, unwavering, even as her heart thrummed with urgency. "You built a life assuming appearances were reality," she said softly, "that power was only wealth, influence was only visibility, and love was only possession. But Lily deserves more than your illusions." The crowd leaned forward, rapt. Even those who had once admired Damon found themselves trapped between fascination and fear. They were witnesses to a reckoning, a moment that none would forget. A mother reclaiming authority, not just for herself, but for the child she loved with every fiber of her being. Damon's mouth opened, closed, words failing him again. "Sophia, please." She shook her head slightly, not with malice, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited long enough. Every hesitation in her movements, every small pause, radiated unshakable authority. She did not need to yell, or to justify, or to plead. Her truth spoke for itself. "You wanted me silent," she said, voice calm but cutting, deliberate. "You wanted appearances, not presence. You wanted compliance, not contribution. You thought that because my voice was quiet, my mind would be quiet too. You were wrong." Damon took a step forward, desperate, unpracticed. He reached again, fingers trembling slightly, as though contact could reclaim authority, as though proximity could rewrite history. "I can fix this, Lily. She doesn't need a facade," Sophia interrupted, cutting him off with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every argument, every manipulation, every attempt at persuasion that he might muster. "She needs truth. She needs recognition. She needs to see her mother stand as a whole person, not a decorative figure." The sirens grew louder, approaching, winding along the cliffside road toward the estate. Their echo mixed with the tension in the room. A warning, a herald, an accompaniment to the revelation unfolding on the stage. Every guest instinctively turned toward the distant horizon, sensing that something monumental was arriving. Damon's hands shook visibly. His empire, built on perception, charm, and control, was unraveling before his eyes. The documents Sophia had activated, the servers she had exposed, the truths she had declared, they were all converging now, leaving him helpless. Sophia's lips curved into a subtle, calm smile. It was not triumphal, not cruel. It was the satisfaction of inevitability. She had prepared for this moment for 12 years, and now everything was aligning. "You spent years seeing only what you wanted," she said softly. "You wanted obedience. You wanted admiration without understanding. You wanted a reflection of your success rather than recognition of what it took to build it. But Lily deserves better. She deserves a mother who teaches her to value herself, her mind, and her choices above all else." The room was so silent it was almost palpable. Guests held their breaths, the chandeliers above casting fractured reflections of awe, disbelief, and the quiet understanding that the dynamics of power, once assumed absolute, had been permanently shifted. Damon swallowed hard. The rehearsed arrogance that had once defined him now crumbled, leaving a man raw, exposed, desperate. "Sophia, please, you don't—" But she did not allow him to continue. She gestured toward the display behind her, showing the server rooms, encrypted files, and the evidence she had been building for years. Every proof of manipulation, every document Damon had assumed invisible, every hidden truth now belonged to her. Lily, unseen in the wings, watched through a security monitor her mother had discreetly installed for safety. Her small face reflected wonder, pride, and the dawning realization that her mother was not just brave, she was unstoppable. The sirens reached the cliffside estate, faint blue and red lights glinting against the white walls of the apex. The first vehicle, a sleek private jet mobilized by Sophia's sister, descended into view, landing on the emergency strip she had secretly integrated for moments exactly like this. Damon's eyes widened, panic now fully exposed. He had assumed that appearances, charm, and money could buffer him against consequences. He had been wrong. Sophia's voice remained calm, unshakable, as if narrating history in real time. "You will see, Damon, that power without integrity is fragile. Influence without truth is empty, and wealth without recognition of those who built it is meaningless." Guests instinctively turned toward the landing strip as the jet's engines roared softly against the cliffside. The sound cut through the tension, a herald of change, of reinforcement, of allies arriving. Damon's hands went to his face. He realized fully that control had not only slipped from his grasp, it was never his to claim. Every strategy he had rehearsed for years, every public display, every manipulation, was now irrelevant. Sophia wiped the last tear from her cheek, the motion deliberate and serene. Her brown eyes reflected determination, intelligence, and the quiet joy of someone who had finally claimed what had been hers all along. Not just as a woman, not just as an architect, but as a mother who would never allow compromise in her child's future. The crowd sensed it. The invisible woman was now fully visible. The child's future had become the fulcrum of power, morality, and consequence. Every whisper, every glance, every realization confirmed that the moment had arrived, irreversible, absolute, undeniable. Damon's chest rose and fell rapidly. He had always measured success through control, appearances, and compliance. Now he measured loss, exposure, and the terrifying certainty that he was powerless against truth, preparation, and maternal resolve. Sophia's gaze shifted to the approaching jet and then back to Damon. Her smile was subtle, deliberate, unyielding. "This is not just the end of a marriage," she said softly. "This is the beginning of a future built on visibility, integrity, and recognition. A future that Lily deserves, and I will deliver. The sirens grew louder, mingling with the jet engines, blending into a symphony of inevitability. The apex itself seemed to hum in alignment, walls, floors, and hidden infrastructure all resonating with the authority and strategy of the woman who had designed them. Damon's eyes darted to the screens, to the landing strip, to the sirens, and then back to Sophia. Every angle, every calculation, every expectation he had counted on was unraveling simultaneously. He was surrounded by proof, presence, and strategy, elements he could no longer manipulate. The jet's door opened and a figure emerged. Dr. Eleanor Vance, Sophia's sister. Her presence radiated authority, command, and the unyielding power of family backing. She approached the stage and the display flickered, showing files labeled Legal Transfer, The Apex, Ownership and Rights. Sophia's finger hovered over the final activation button. One press would transfer total control of the Apex, its intellectual property, and every hidden asset to Vance Architectural Limited, permanently. Damon took a shaky step forward, voice breaking. "No, you can't." Sophia's eyes locked on him. The entire room held its breath, and in that instant she pressed the button. The world was about to witness the full reckoning of Damon Croft. A shadow crossed the cliff. The crowd instinctively turned, their breath catching in unison. The night sky, a perfect canvas of inky black, suddenly bore a presence they could not yet define. A whirring sound grew louder, mingling with the faint echo of sirens below. The tension became almost physical, pressing against everyone in the room. Lights swept upward, cutting through darkness like a searchlight dissecting secrets. The elegant clarity of the beams made the estate below seem fragile, a toy perched on the edge of the world. But the light was purposeful. It heralded something imminent, unstoppable and undeniable. A private jet descended, its approach deliberate and precise, toward a strip hidden in the stone, a feature of the apex that no one but Sophia had known. Damon's eyes widened in real-time calculation, heart hammering, mind racing, yet failing to anticipate the full scope of what was coming. The cliffside, which he had once thought belonged solely to his design and control, now felt alive with strategy beyond his understanding. The crowd instinctively stepped back, as if aware that this was no longer just a social gathering, no longer just a spectacle of wealth and charm. Something larger than all of them had arrived, and all eyes, consciously or not, shifted skyward. The jet's landing gear touched the strip with quiet precision, a whisper of contact that belied the magnitude of its arrival. The logo gleamed under the cliffside lights. Vance Architectural Ltd. Each letter shone like a proclamation. The magnitude of the revelation did not escape the guests. This was not a private act. This was strategy, execution, and authority manifest in steel, wings, and intent. Damon turned, disbelief freezing his face. His well-practiced mask of arrogance faltered, faltering like a structure losing its foundation. The calculations he had made, the assumptions he had relied upon, the narratives he had built, none of them accounted for this. The doors of the jet opened. A figure emerged, poised, commanding, yet radiating a warmth that contrasted sharply with Damon's frozen rigidity. Dr. Eleanor Vance stepped onto the landing strip. Every movement was deliberate, her coat adjusted, her boots steady, her eyes scanning the crowd and landing finally on Damon with unflinching authority. A hush fell over the room, palpable and electric. Guests instinctively leaned forward, caught between awe and disbelief. Cameras pivoted, flashlights ready to capture the unfolding confrontation that had the weight of a storm behind it. The private jet behind Eleanor reflected the cliffside lights, casting long shadows over the estate. The apex, for the first time, seemed dwarfed, not by scale, but by the authority arriving upon it. Damon's blue eyes darted between Sophia and Eleanor. The calculations racing in his mind, the corporate maneuvers, the public image, the facade of control, collapsed under the weight of their presence. He had assumed he had accounted for all contingencies, yet he had overlooked one essential truth. The women he had underestimated were never invisible. They had only been preparing. Eleanor's gaze swept the hall with quiet command. She did not shout. She did not demand attention. She merely walked with a presence that made the room lean in without conscious thought. And in that moment, Damon realized the full scope of the miscalculation he had made in assuming visibility equaled power. Sophia stepped forward beside him, calm, measured, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of execution and preparation. Her hand moved subtly, gesturing toward the display that had revealed Damon's misdeeds, the server rooms, and the legal documentation transferring intellectual property. Each detail now had reinforcement, authority beyond challenge. "You built a life assuming control," Sophia said, voice quiet but resonant. "Yet you never saw what it truly meant to hold power responsibly. You never considered that strength could exist outside of your sight, outside of your wealth, outside of your carefully curated image." Damon's jaw tightened, lips trembling. The polite, controlled arrogance that had been his shield for years no longer served. Eleanor had arrived, unannounced, unassailable, a physical manifestation of the authority Damon had assumed was forever his to command. The guests watched in silence, every heartbeat sinking with the rising tension. Some instinctively whispered to neighbors, some held glasses mid-air, but no one dared break the spell. Cameras captured every micro-expression, every tremor, every glint of fear or awe. Eleanor's footsteps echoed softly on the landing strip as she approached the stage, the weight of every step emphasizing the inevitability of the shift. Damon tried to speak, to rally, to assert the narrative, but his voice faltered under the gravity of the convergence. "You thought you could control truth," Eleanor said softly, voice amplified subtly through a hidden drone system. "You thought secrets could remain hidden, evidence concealed, and authority maintained through charm and intimidation. You were wrong. And now the reckoning is here." Damon's hand twitched as though to reach for power, for influence, for a method to regain control. But he could reach only air. Everything he had assumed, everything he had built, was now contingent on the strategic brilliance of the women he had disregarded. Sophia's eyes met her sister's, subtle nods exchanged in silence. Every signal was deliberate, precision, preparation, and timing, all long planned, finally executed. Together they represented a force Damon could neither negotiate nor intimidate. The guests began murmuring, a soft wave of realization passing through the crowd. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a strategic, calculated, undeniable assertion of authority and justice. Wealth and power could no longer mask inequity or negligence. Damon's breathing grew rapid. For the first time, he saw the consequences of underestimating visibility beyond appearances. He had assumed charm, appearance, and inherited privilege could compensate for ignorance, arrogance, and oversight. He had been wrong. Sophia stepped closer to the microphone, voice soft, measured, and precise. "You built a life on assumptions, Damon. You assumed visibility equaled recognition, that compliance equaled contribution, and that silence equaled weakness. But the truth has a way of asserting itself. And now—" The jet's engines hummed faintly behind Eleanor, the landing strip glinting in the light, a silent reinforcement of inevitability. The apex itself seemed to lean toward the unfolding confrontation, walls and floors resonating as though acknowledging the shift in authority. Damon's hands shook. Every calculated move he had prepared, every prepared narrative, every pretense of control, all unraveling in the presence of strategic clarity, undeniable authority, and maternal resolve. You underestimated us, Sophia continued, voice deliberate. You assumed obedience would replace intellect. You assumed silence would replace vision. But power without responsibility is fragile, influence without foresight is temporary, and charm without recognition of contribution is meaningless. The crowd leaned in further. Every whisper, every subtle gasp, every shift in posture reflected the growing realization. The invisible woman had orchestrated her visibility, the unseen mother had reclaimed authority, and the underestimated sister had arrived to enforce it. Damon's lips parted, words failing him again. Sophia, Eleanor, please, Eleanor's gaze remained unwavering, cold yet authoritative. She gestured subtly toward the legal display. Damon Croft, you have lost claim. The apex and all associated intellectual property are now fully under Vance Architectural Limited. Your access is revoked. You are legally barred from interference. The crowd gasped audibly. Cameras pivoted, capturing the documents, the verified files, the immutable evidence of the shift. Damon staggered slightly, caught between disbelief, panic, and the dawning reality of absolute loss. Sophia's lips curved in a subtle, serene smile. The sky answered, she said softly. And it brought clarity, resolution, and justice. Suddenly, the private jet's interior lights flickered, and a series of encrypted drones deployed, hovering around the estate. A single message blinked on the main screen behind Sophia. System override detected. Unauthorized access attempt. Security breach imminent. The apex, designed to protect truth, was now signaling something unexpected. Someone, or something else, had entered the equation. The room held its breath. Even Damon, frozen in disbelief, understood instinctively. This was no longer just a personal reckoning. The game had changed. Dr. Eleanor Vance stepped onto the tarmac, each footfall deliberate, resonant against the hard concrete of the hidden landing strip. Confidence radiated from her like heat from the sun, her presence commanding even before she spoke. She was brilliant, black, and powerful, a mirror of the determination Sophia had carried quietly for years. Her gaze swept across the crowd at the apex, landing briefly on Damon. Every measured glance, every slight tilt of her head, communicated authority that needed no reinforcement. Damon's expression shifted, subtle disbelief giving way to a creeping dread. He had underestimated the strategic power of family, of loyalty, and of intellect united. Her voice, amplified subtly through drones hovering in precise formation above, cut through the tension like steel slicing silk. Damon Croft, she said, crisp and authoritative. The intellectual property of the apex now belongs to Vance Architectural Limited. The room went silent, not the polite hush of awe or curiosity, but a heavy, almost physical silence weighted with realization. The truth of the words did not just strike the crowd, they anchored themselves in the psyche of everyone present. A pause. Eleanor let the gravity settle, letting the truth hang between them like a delicate yet unbreakable glass. You lost all usage rights the moment she signed, she continued, eyes piercing Damon's. Every beam, every blueprint, every plan you assumed you owned. It was never yours to control. Damon's jaw clenched, fists tightening involuntarily at his sides. The arrogance, the charm, the rehearsed dominance, all of it had evaporated under the simple, undeniable authority of the women before him. He realized, belatedly, that the facade of power had been fragile, built on assumptions, not reality. The crowd shifted uneasily. Many had once admired Damon Croft, the golden boy of real estate, the man whose charm and legacy seemed untouchable. But the sight of Eleanor standing beside Sophia, fully asserting control, revealed a new truth. Authority built on fear and aesthetics could crumble under intellect, preparation, and familial loyalty. Security personnel, previously stationed as background ornaments, now closed in with precision, marking the physical transfer of power. "Please vacate the premises," Eleanor said, her voice calm but unyielding, her words carrying the weight of law and inevitability. Damon's lips parted. He tried to form words, pleas, arguments, manipulations, but they faltered under the clarity of the situation. Every legal clause Sophia had written, every precaution she had taken, every contingency planned for over 12 years now converged in this moment. He could not argue against it. He could only observe. Sophia stood beside her sister, subtle nods exchanged between them. Each glance communicated decades of strategy distilled into seconds. The audience, unaware of the full extent of preparation, witnessed only the elegance of control, the inevitability of justice, the raw force of two women reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. "You thought ownership was just a matter of name and appearance," Eleanor continued. "You assumed that charm and inherited wealth could replace diligence, that perception could outweigh reality, that authority was only about being seen. You were wrong." Damon staggered slightly, hands clenching, the first cracks of panic etched deeply into his expression. The facade of calm, polished perfection he had cultivated was gone. Every audience member could see it, each movement betraying the internal collapse he could no longer hide. Sophia's voice joined her sister's, a quiet but lethal resonance. "You assumed silence, compliance, and invisibility meant weakness. But strength doesn't always announce itself, Damon. Sometimes strength is preparation, patience, and knowing when to act." The lights from the cliffside chandeliers reflected off the surfaces of the apex, illuminating the subtle nod between sisters. The symmetry was poetic, almost ceremonial. Power was no longer abstract. It had been physically, legally, and psychologically transferred. Guests whispered, some exchanging stunned glances, others instinctively recording, understanding that they were witnessing a rare and decisive shift in authority. This was not merely a corporate or personal victory. It was an undeniable public demonstration of strategic brilliance, intellect, and moral clarity overcoming charm, wealth, and arrogance. Damon's hands trembled slightly. He had built a life on the illusion of control, and now that illusion had dissolved. Every calculated move he had relied upon was rendered meaningless by foresight he had never anticipated. The foresight of preparation, loyalty, and the unrelenting power of familial strategy. Eleanor's gaze swept over the property, over the crowd, over Damon himself. Her voice remained calm, deliberate. "The Apex is now legally, morally, and operationally under Vance architectural linterness. Any attempt to interfere will be met with immediate action. Consider this the final warning." Sophia stepped forward, close enough for the crowd to see the subtle alignment of two forces working seamlessly. Mother, sister, strategist, architect. "You assumed a facade could protect you forever, Damon. But truth, persistence, and justice are never silent. They wait, they build, and they arrive." The crowd collectively exhaled, sensing the enormity of the moment. Every gesture, every word, every subtle movement of the sisters communicated dominance without threat, authority without aggression, and inevitability without violence. Damon's face had paled, lips trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The empire he had thought untouchable, the life he had assumed secure, had shifted irrevocably. The apex itself, once a symbol of his dominance, now belonged in its entirety to the women he had underestimated, to the child who would inherit its truth. The sirens outside grew louder, mingling with the faint hum of the jet engines still idling nearby. Every sound punctuated the shift, signaling the physical, legal, and psychological finality of the transfer. The apex had changed owners, and with it, the balance of power had shifted beyond Damon's comprehension. Sophia's gaze softened momentarily as she looked at her daughter on the monitors, small eyes wide in admiration and understanding. Lily's future was no longer subject to illusions of control or the arbitrary whims of a man who could not see past appearances. Eleanor's voice, now slightly louder, carried across the estate. Consider this the moment when accountability meets inevitability. You are no longer welcome. The law, logic, and preparation now govern the apex. Damon tried to speak again, his voice cracking under the weight of reality, but no words could undo what had been executed with precision, legality, and foresight. Every angle, every detail, every contingency had been accounted for. The crowd watched as he retreated slowly, his hands half raised, as though gesture could restore control that no longer existed. His legacy, carefully curated, had fractured under the strategic brilliance and unwavering moral clarity of Sophia and Eleanor. Sophia's lips curved in a quiet, deliberate smile. She did not celebrate. She merely acknowledged the completion of years of preparation, patience, and strategy. This house, she said softly, gesturing to the apex, was never just bricks and beams. It was built with vision, intellect, and care. And now its true custodians will continue its purpose, honestly, and without compromise. The crowd absorbed her words, some nodding in quiet respect, others whispering their astonishment. Cameras captured the moment, immortalizing the transfer, the authority, and the unmistakable shift in power. Eleanor stepped forward beside Sophia, close but not overlapping, their presence a combined force, authority, intellect, and resolve embodied in human form. Damon's attempts at intimidation now seemed laughable in contrast. The sun, or rather the first faint hints of dawn, began to pierce the horizon, illuminating the cliffside and the apex with subtle gold. The light seemed almost symbolic, a herald of clarity, justice, and renewal. Sophia finally exhaled, small and deliberate, as if the air itself had been holding her attention for years. She looked toward the monitors, toward the approaching future, and then back to Damon, whose shoulders slumped under the weight of undeniable reality. Eleanor's gaze softened briefly toward her sister. "Ready to fly home, architect?" she asked, subtle warmth threading through authority. Sophia smiled. "More than ready. It's time to build again. For real this time." The room absorbed the gravity of the moment, sensing not only the conclusion of Damon's control, but the beginning of something far larger. Suddenly, an alarm beeped from the Apex's newly secured server room. Red lights flashed, and a message appeared on every screen in the estate. "Unauthorized network breach detected. Systems compromised. Immediate action required." The sisters froze. Even Damon, powerless and defeated, instinctively turned toward the source. Someone, or something else, had entered the equation. The apex, designed to protect truth, was under threat, and this time the danger wasn't visible from the sky. Eleanor wrapped Sophia in an embrace that felt like more than comfort. It was strategy, reassurance, and unspoken triumph all at once. Years of planning, patience, and preparation condensed into the weight of that single hug. It was not sentimental, it was decisive. It conveyed that the work had succeeded, but the journey was far from over. "Ready to fly home, architect?" Eleanor asked, her voice low, measured, yet carrying warmth that only sisters could share. Her words were more than casual. They were a declaration of authority, a recognition of the power Sophia had quietly amassed over 12 years, and a reminder that her brilliance had never been invisible. Sophia allowed herself the briefest exhale, letting her shoulders relax just enough to feel human, just enough to feel the triumph without arrogance. She looked back once, long enough to see the mansion, the apex, gleaming under the cliffside lights. Its edges shimmered, the reflection of chandeliers catching the night air, and in that light she saw the man whose control had depended entirely on assumption. Damon stood on the terrace, frozen in disbelief. His empire, his life's careful narrative, the illusion of mastery, all crumbling before him. He had built towers of influence on borrowed minds, stolen ideas, and the quiet endurance of others. Now the foundation had shifted. The apex, the pinnacle of his vanity and ambition, belonged to the woman he had dismissed for years. Sophia's lips curved slightly, not in triumph, but in satisfaction of inevitability. "More than ready," she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle but undeniable weight that reached every corner of the estate. "I have real work to do." Her words were simple, but they carried resonance. Work that mattered, work that built truth, work that created legacy and recognition where it had been denied. She was no longer the silent architect behind the empire of someone else. She was the visible architect of her own life, of her daughter's future, and of a truth that could no longer be concealed. Damon's hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked at Sophia and Eleanor, realizing the extent of his failure. Every strategy he had relied upon, the charm, the inherited privilege, the carefully curated narrative, was now irrelevant. Every assumption about obedience, silence, and invisibility had betrayed him. The realization struck him like a blow. He had never truly understood power. The crowd, still assembled at the apex, absorbed the shift. Whispers moved like currents, a tide of astonishment and comprehension. They had come to witness wealth, status, and spectacle, but they had instead been presented with strategy, intelligence, and moral authority in motion. Power, they realized, had a shape they had rarely seen: calm, deliberate, and righteous. Eleanor's hand remained on Sophia's shoulder, a subtle reminder that they were not just individuals, but a united force. Authority was no longer abstract, it was embodied. It was intellect, preparation, and unwavering focus, manifested through action. Damon had thought charisma and aesthetics were enough. He had been wrong. Sophia's gaze swept the estate one last time. She noted every detail: the balconies, the lighting, the rooms that had once been hers in anonymity. Every corner of the apex had been witness to her work, her intellect, and her restraint. And now it would serve as a testament, not to Damon Croft, but to the architects, the visionaries, the invisible minds behind every towering facade. "Damon," Sophia said, her voice clear, soft but resolute. "This empire you built, it wasn't yours to own. You borrowed brilliance and passed it off as inheritance. But inheritance is not vision. It's not intellect. And it's certainly not courage. That belongs to those who dared to build when no one watched." Damon opened his mouth, but words failed him again. The authority radiating from the two women was absolute. The crowd, sensing his vulnerability, instinctively leaned back, their fascination mingling with the instinctual recognition that control had shifted irrevocably. Eleanor stepped slightly ahead, her movements deliberate, her presence a physical assertion of the inevitable. "Sophia has restored what was hers, what was always hers, to begin with," she said. "This estate, this property, these designs, they are now under rightful stewardship. Any attempt at interference will be met with immediate action." Damon's blue eyes darted from Sophia to Eleanor, then to the approaching jet waiting to whisk them away. He realized fully that his public humiliation was complete, but more than that, it was permanent. Control, influence, power, these had always been constructs of perception, and now perception had shifted. Sophia took a step forward toward the private jet, her gaze never leaving Damon's. "You believed that control could exist without recognition, that influence could thrive without honesty, that authority could survive without integrity. You were wrong." Every word landed like a chisel against marble. Damon's composure cracked further. Every breath was heavy, every movement forced. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be powerless in the presence of someone who had never been invisible. The crowd's whispers escalated, some discreetly recording, some gasping audibly, all captivated by the unfolding demonstration of strategy, intellect, and the reclamation of rightful authority. Damon had underestimated the meticulous planning of the women before him, the quiet patience that had outlasted his charm and his arrogance. Sophia reached the foot of the tarmac, the private jet awaiting. Its sleek lines gleamed under the cliffside lights, an extension of the authority and preparation that had orchestrated this moment. Every detail, every angle, every technical nuance had been anticipated. She had not left room for error. Eleanor followed, their movements synchronized like a single entity, sisters and strategists in harmony. "Let's go," Eleanor said softly, yet firmly. "The world is waiting. Your work is just beginning." Sophia nodded, looking back one final time. The mansion, Damon, the crumbling empire, all of it reflected the collapse of illusions built on borrowed minds. The lessons were etched in stone, glass, and steel, visible for anyone willing to see. As the sisters ascended the steps of the jet, Damon remained on the terrace, isolated and exposed. His empire, built on assumptions and appearances, had been dismantled without a single act of violence. Every strategy, every manipulation, every charm offensive, nullified. Sophia settled into her seat, calm, serene, eyes reflecting resolve. Eleanor sat beside her, quiet and commanding, like the calm before a storm that would reshape the landscape of their industry. The engines hummed to life, the private jet rising slowly into the night sky. Below, the apex shimmered, a monument not to Damon Croft, but to the truth, intelligence, and persistence of the women who had created it, protected it, and finally reclaimed it. The wind outside whistled through the cliffside, carrying whispers of change, renewal, and lessons learned the hard way. Power, true power, was no longer defined by wealth, charm, or inherited influence. It was defined by vision, courage, preparation, and moral clarity. Damon's gaze followed the jet, a mixture of disbelief, regret, and dawning understanding etched into every line of his face. For the first time, he realized that real influence cannot be simulated, cannot be borrowed, cannot be stolen. It must be earned, lived, and respected. Inside the jet, Sophia and Eleanor exchanged a subtle smile. They had reclaimed the future, not just for themselves, but for the child who would inherit a world built on honesty, intellect, and integrity. The city lights below twinkled, distant yet steady. The journey ahead was just beginning, but this moment, the reclamation of truth, authority, and power, would define them forever. Suddenly, a notification pinged across every screen in the jet. A new message, anonymous, encrypted, and urgent. "The system breach is larger than you think. Somebody inside your network is watching. Immediate action required." Sophia's eyes narrowed. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Even in the sky, even in victory, a new challenge had arrived, one that could change everything they had just fought for. The private jet leveled, engines humming steadily, but the calm inside hid a storm yet to come. The game was far from over. As the private jet sliced through the night sky, the hum of the engines felt less mechanical and more like the heartbeat of a new beginning. Sophia pressed her palms lightly against the cool leather of the seat, exhaling slowly, deliberately, as if releasing years of weight she had carried silently. Each breath carried the remnants of tension, frustration, and unacknowledged brilliance that had been accumulated over a lifetime of being overlooked. She hadn't won through anger, hadn't won through spectacle, and hadn't won with rage aimed at Damon Croft. The private jet was not a symbol of triumph over him. It was a symbol of preparation, patience, and foresight. Every blueprint she had drawn, Every legal clause she had embedded, every contingency she had planned, had led to this quiet, undeniable victory. It was the power of intellect, unshaken by charm or wealth, finally manifesting in real, observable consequences. Eleanor sat beside her, hands folded calmly, eyes sharp and scanning the horizon. The older sister's presence was a grounding force. There was no fanfare, no celebratory gestures, just quiet understanding, a shared recognition that what had been built could not be undone. The victory was not personal. It was structural, inevitable, and instructive. Sophia's gaze drifted to the lights below, the distant city stretching like a map of possibilities. She thought of Lily, her daughter, and the example she was setting. This was more than wealth, more than empire. It was the reclamation of identity and intellect. The lesson she was leaving for her child was simple, yet profound. Your value is in your mind, in your preparation, in your ability to think ahead and act with integrity. "I can't believe it's finally over," Sophia said softly, voice nearly lost in the hum of the engines, yet deliberate enough that Eleanor heard every word. Eleanor smiled slightly. "It's never really over, Sophia. Lessons linger longer than victories, and they echo farther than buildings." The words sank in. Sophia realized that her journey had been less about defeating Damon and more about teaching herself and others that invisibility is not weakness and silence is not submission. Every moment she had endured, every slight she had absorbed, had been an investment in a future that now belonged entirely to her. The private jet banked slightly, revealing the coastline beneath them. The cliffs, the ocean, the apex itself, it all looked different from above. No longer was it a stage of humiliation or arrogance. It was a monument to truth, to vision, to the unseen hands that had built its brilliance. The perspective reinforced the gravity of what had just happened. Power is not inherited, bought, or performed. Power is built, quietly, deliberately, and with integrity. Sophia reached for the tablet on the seat console. Schematics, contracts, and project plans lay open, each a testament to her expertise and foresight. She scrolled through them with precise attention, noticing details that could still be refined, areas where the future could expand, possibilities that had only just begun. Winning. The apex had been the first step. The real work, creating, building, leading, was only starting. Eleanor's voice broke her thoughts. "You know, Damon will spend the rest of his life trying to understand what just happened. He'll never see it coming. That the quiet mind was the one orchestrating the outcome all along." Sophia nodded, a faint smile tracing her lips. "That's the point, Eleanor. No one can underestimate preparation and patience. No one can erase the mind behind the beauty without consequences." Outside, the night sky stretched infinitely. Stars winked like witnesses to the meticulous orchestration below. Sophia thought of every sleepless night, every blueprint painstakingly drawn, every contract clause carefully written. Those moments of labor, often unrecognized, were the real inheritance she was passing down, to Lily, to herself, and to the truth that brilliance cannot remain invisible forever. She reflected on Damon one last time, not with hatred, but with clarity. The lessons he had inadvertently taught her were many. The danger of underestimating those who remain silent, the fragility of power built on perception alone, and the inevitability of consequences when arrogance blinds judgment. His empire would crumble under its own assumptions, just as the apex's rightful ownership had shifted under hers. The hum of the jet seemed to mirror her heartbeat, steady and purposeful. She thought about all the people who had ever overlooked her, dismissed her, or reduced her worth to appearance. They had taught her patience. They had taught her strategy. They had unwittingly prepared her for this moment. And now, finally, she could breathe. "I want Lily to see this," Sophia said softly. Not just the victory, but the method. Not just the power, but the preparation. Not just the wealth, but the integrity. Eleanor nodded. She will. And she'll understand that influence isn't given. It's earned, protected, and wielded responsibly. And more importantly, she'll learn the value of being seen for her mind, not her surroundings. Sophia's eyes lingered on the horizon. The city below seemed distant, almost abstract, as though the plane itself had lifted them not only from the cliffside estate, but from the constraints of expectation. She felt light but focused, powerful but grounded. Every lesson, every hardship, every calculated step had led to this moment of clarity. She remembered the night of the Apex Gala, the humiliation, the disbelief in Damon's eyes, the murmurs of the crowd. But those memories no longer carried pain. They carried context. They carried perspective. They carried proof that endurance, intellect, and integrity are far stronger than charm, legacy, or inherited privilege. Eleanor leaned back, quiet, observing her sister with the calm pride of someone who had known from the beginning that this moment would come. "Are you ready for the next project?" she asked. Sophia's smile widened. It was not the triumphant smile of revenge, but the composed smile of someone who understood the stakes of real power. "More than ready," she said. "Let's build a world that lasts." The engines of the jet purred like a promise. The night stretched endlessly ahead, full of opportunity and responsibility. The lessons of the past were etched in memory, but the future, her future, Lily's future, the legacy of intellect reclaimed, was alive and waiting. Every blueprint, every contract, every detail had been a step toward this moment. And now, with the horizon in front of her, Sophia realized the true essence of victory. It was not the downfall of Damon Croft, nor the reclamation of the apex, nor the applause of the crowd. It was the quiet, enduring power of preparation, foresight, and integrity. She looked toward the window, at the stars scattered across the dark velvet sky, and whispered softly, "Foundations remember everything." And eventually, they decide who stands. The jet continued into the night, steady, purposeful, unstoppable. It carried not only two sisters and their dreams, but a legacy of wisdom that would echo for generations. Every lesson, every plan, every patient step had led to this moment. The real power, Sophia knew, was not wealth, not fame, not beauty. It was vision, endurance, and the courage to build when no one was watching. Even in the silence of the cabin, the magnitude of what had been accomplished reverberated. The apex was no longer a symbol of control for Damon Croft. It was a testament to the truth, to preparation, and to the intellect that had always belonged to Sophia Vance. And as the night stretched onward, the stars seeming to shimmer in approval, Sophia allowed herself a single, deep breath, the first free breath she had taken in over a decade. But just as the city lights faded behind them, Sophia's tablet beeped again. A new encrypted message appeared. "Congratulations, but you are not finished. Someone else owns a part of the truth. Find them before they find you." Sophia's eyes narrowed. Eleanor's jaw clenched. The victory was real, but the war for truth had only just revealed its next player. The sky outside stretched dark and infinite, and the story was far from over.